In today's show, Anthony Simons gets $100 million to stay in Portland, and Jusuf Nurkic, well, he's still out there. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter Mike Richman, and you are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts. Make the show your first listen every single day. The only daily Trailblazers podcast coming at you every single weekday. So start your day with Locked On Blazers as your very first listen. The first day of free agency, or the official start of free agency, was today, 3 p.m. Pacific time. Things got started, but they really got started before that, when Kevin Durant reportedly met with Brooklyn Nets owner Joe Tsai and asked for a trade out of Brooklyn, meaning that Kevin Durant is going to probably get traded here, maybe get traded here. I guess he's under contract for 4 more years. They don't have to trade him here in the next couple weeks. Kyrie Irving likely to follow suit, and the Nets could look very, very, very different. And because of that, I think there's been some stuff on hold with maybe the other dominoes to fall. Whatever happens with the Suns, because reportedly Kevin Durant wants to go to Phoenix, and so DeAndre Ayton sign and trade to Brooklyn could be what's next in the mix. But there's a bunch of other dominoes that could fall too, and I think some of those dominoes potentially could impact the Blazers. That was what got things started, but then, things got rolling, and they got rolling quickly. There were almost 30 reported deals in the first 30 minutes. I want to talk about free agent stuff from a Blazers perspective, but I want to set the stage by being like a massive ripple effect started when Kevin Durant asked for a trade. When Kevin Durant asked for a trade, the whole sort of dynamic of the league shifted, because everyone has to watch and reconsider and call Brooklyn and figure it the hell out what they're going to do, right? And then figure out if what the sort of the ripple is from if Durant goes here and this goes here, what are other teams going to do? Okay, this team that was going to be in play for this is, it's like Durant is a seismic shift in the league. I was talking with a friend actually earlier today. I was like, is Kevin Durant, if he gets traded, the best player to be traded since Kareem in 1975? I mean, the other that came to mind when we were just sort of brainstorming this word, like Anthony Davis, but Kevin Durant's better than he was when he got traded to the Lakers, and Shaq when he got traded to the Heat in 2005. Like, it's a short list of people who are as good as KD who switch teams via trade like this. It is very, very, very rare, and it'll shake up the league. But the Blazers are not going to be, very unlikely, let's say that, very, very unlikely at this stage to be involved in a Kevin Durant sign and trade. One, this is like not his preferred destination. Two, seemingly they've already made their move and agreed to sign Anthony Simons. Simons would undoubtedly be involved in a trade for Kevin Durant. There is no Blazers trade that doesn't involve, Shaedon Sharpe and Anthony Simons, probably Josh Hart, like good basketball players going back to Brooklyn. Maybe not specifically Josh Hart, because maybe they need Eric Bledsoe's money to make the money work. And then if you include Hart, then they got to throw in Seth Curry. And do they want to do that? It's like, it gets a little bit dicey, but certainly Shaedon Sharpe and Anthony Simons and Nasir Little are gone when if that trade were to go down. So, but Anthony Simons has agreed to come back to the Blazers, and it was reported as sort of, not as moments into free agency. This stuff's hard to track. I want to be clear. Typically, I want to give credit to reporters who report stuff, and I'll do my best here. But who got it first between Shams Charania of The Athletic and Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN is It's hard. It's hard at the speed that it goes in. But the first person I saw report it was Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN. So I said, Ant is coming back, baby. 4 years, $100 million. Why this is important, we'll talk all about the Ant stuff here in this first segment. But, if the Blazers were in the Kevin Durant sweepstakes, you would think that maybe they wouldn't have agreed to this contract with Anthony Simons. Or if you're really into tinfoil hat stuff, the reason why Anthony Simons got a little more money than he was reportedly going to get is because he's going to be included in a future sign trade. I don't believe that, but I'm giving you a tinfoil hat thing. I think Ant's coming back. Like Occam's razor, simplest explanation is the easiest. The Blazers really value Anthony Simons. They paid him like they really value him. They gave him $100 million, and he's going to be back and be part of the future. Everything has always pointed to them doing this. Let's say no surprises. I mean, surprises are fun. Maybe there'll be some surprises. Come back next week. We'll have more shows, but the simplest explanation is the easiest one, or is usually the most correct one. Anthony Simons back in the mix, $100 million. And you might be saying, Mike, bruh, maybe we're not that familiar. Maybe don't call me bruh. Maybe you call me sir. Say, sir, good sir. I thought he was only going to get an average annual value of like 20. The reporting was 4 for 80, and the guess here from this podcaster was 4 for 80 for so long, so many months. 4 for 80 seemed right in the range. I think two things happened. One, I don't know what the structure of the contract looks like, and I want to be clear. So many times the early first, second of free agency numbers are way higher than the actual guaranteed money. So let's wait to fully judge this until we get the details on all of the incentives baked in and all of the unlikely incentives and likely incentives that Ant has to hit to reach 100. If it's just straight up $100 million, no nothing, we'll talk about that when it gets there. But at the time there was last year, I remember Zach Collins signed like a 3 for $34 million. Well, it turns out one of the years was guaranteed. There was a bunch of non-guaranteed money. There was there was incentives for playing time and games played and all this stuff, right? Like it wasn't a $35 million contract. At the time, it looked like the worst contract of the summer. And then it's like, oh, right. Because reporting this and reporting this stuff's hard to do. So, but it's just part of the game. It's the part of the game that Shams and Woj are playing, is that they're reporting for the agents and on the agents' behalf, and they're going to report as the biggest figure they possibly can. I think that is part of it. No doubt about it. We will see with the Ant stuff, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if Ant got like $90 million guaranteed with up to 100, or 85 with up to 100 if he hits certain benchmarks. That wouldn't surprise me one little bit. And the reporting was that Ant was going to get somewhere between $80 and $90 million over the course of 4 seasons. And if that's what it is, don't worry about it. If it is $100 million, here's the other explanation. One, Anthony Simons was so darn good at the end of the year that his agency was able to parlay that into saying, give him the reins like you really gave him the reins before. Clear out big minute opportunities for him. Get CJ McCollum out of his way. Carve out a starting spot. Ant arrived, and we all know that he'd be underpaid at 20, so pay him for what his production looks like it can be. Pay him for what his production looks like it truly can be. That's more than $20 million annually. I think that's part of it. I also think Jalen Brunson got Anthony Simons paid. I think the New York Knicks and Jalen Brunson got Anthony Simons paid. I mentioned this when we were talking about in a show earlier this week. I believe it was Tuesday's show that posted in your feed, is that was Anthony Simons going to get Jalen Brunson money? And I said, no, he's not. And Jalen Brunson reportedly, according to Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN, signed a 4-year, $104 million deal with the New York Knicks. So guess what? Anthony Simons got Jalen Brunson money. $4 million extra dollars over the course of 4 years, $1 million a year more for Brunson. That Simons got the Brunson money. He got the Brunson money. He didn't get more, and maybe that's important in it's more important in like football and stuff. But it's like perhaps meaningful to the Jalen Brunson camp that he's the highest paid guard that switches teams this year. Whatever reward you get for being that, but I think with all of the stuff that was publicly out there on what Jalen Brunson was going to get for 2 and 3 and 4 days, that was, it was like, okay, if Jalen Brunson is going to get $100 million a year or $100 million, $25 million a year, Ant's people and Ant's team says, look at that. Look at that. Do you think Anthony Simons at the end of this contract is going to be better than Jalen Brunson is now? And if you say yes, you got the price just went up. Yesterday's price is not today's price. Jalen Brunson drove that price up, and the Knicks drove that price up. So I think my take here is that, yeah, it's a slight overpay in general, based on perception of what Ant was going to be paid. But one, I don't think $5 million annually is like crazy. I don't think it's a crazy it's not $35 million. It's not in the 30s. It's more than I thought Ant was going to get, and it's maybe more than like what seemed like it was going to be a pretty good deal for him for 80. But again, the guaranteed money stuff. So yeah, I think it's a slight overpay. I don't think it's enough to say like, oh, this hamstrings the franchise forever. Anthony Simons got some money. He got some money, and he maybe got a little more money than you thought. And certainly the Blazers are going to be pressed on the margins to be a team that gets better. But if they pay Ant and they pay Nurk, and we'll talk about him in a moment because they haven't paid him yet, and they pay Dame like and Jeremy Grant and all this stuff, it's like they're not going to be a cap space team for 4 years. We're talking about luxury tax bill, and you got to hope that the team is willing to pay a luxury tax bill. If they're not willing to pay a luxury tax bill, it doesn't matter that Ant made $5 million. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If they're not willing to go deep, if they're not willing to be deep, big spenders, it doesn't matter. If they are, and Anthony Simons extra $5 million in the luxury tax world becomes, $17 million extra $1 million. Yeah, we can say like, whoops, maybe you should have tried to get a little bit cheaper, but we'll see what Nurk's money comes in at, and maybe that's where the average comes out. That is assuming that Jusuf Nurkic comes back, because y'all, Anthony Simons agreed to a deal moments into free agency. This was a done deal. And the perception was that from the outside, and from me personally sitting in this chair, was that Nurk was in a similar spot. And now we sit here today. I'm recording this after 9:45 on a Thursday evening. And no news on Nurk. That chirping you hear is the crickets who are just hanging out in the Bosnian Beast house in West Lynn like, when are we getting the money, dude? And that's the question that we're going to discuss in the second segment. Where's that money for Jusuf Nurkic, and what's the deal? But first, I want to tell you about Arcade 1-Up. Boom shaka laka. NBA Jam is back. Boom shakalaka, if you're familiar. Arcade 1-Up, the leader in home retro arcade games, is not only bringing back the best basketball game ever, they've made it bigger with the Shaq Edition machine. NBA Jam rocks, and you can get it into your home thanks to the good folks at Arcade 1-Up. You can pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade1up.com for an estimated early September ship date. Arcade 1-Up, like I said, is the place for classic games. If you don't want to play NBA Jam, or you want to get some other games, Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and a bunch of others, starting at just $399. But right now, here's the real news. They're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq Edition machine to a Locked On listener. So enter for a chance to win one of these consoles for your home. Go to arcade1up.com/lockedon. That's arcade, the number 1, up.com/lockedon. You've got until July 8th to enter to win that NBA Jam Shaq Edition console. All right, Anthony Simons gets paid. But there's this kind of world out there where the force of the NBA is shaking a little bit. And part of me thinks that's why Jusuf Nurkic hasn't been paid yet. Not that I think Jusuf Nurkic is going to be signed and traded for Kevin Durant, but I think that there is a chance that sort of the larger, massive shakeup that could be coming when Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant are traded from the Brooklyn Nets, Portland is trying to get involved in that in some form or fashion, and potentially Jusuf Nurkic's money, like contract, could be used in a sign and trade to allow the Blazers to sneak up in there some way, somehow. Or it's totally unrelated, and the center market is not as frothy as Jusuf Nurkic camp would have hoped, and so the big money for Nurk just isn't out there. You're pointing around to the centers in the market, and you're saying the most anyone's making is the mid-level, Nurk. Like, there isn't a $17-18 million contract just waiting for you, and that's not the market for centers right now. Like, just straight up, that's not the market for centers, and that has caused an impasse. That the once like, oh yeah, Nurk's going to get this, just common raise. He's making $12 million a year for the last 4 seasons. He signed a 4 for $48 contract, his first deal with the Blazers. That was coming off his rookie scale deal when he had, he had some injuries and all that, and then he was really good, and then he got injured again, and he comes in and gets 4 for $48, and at the time a really team friendly deal. I think Nurk when he was on the court, probably outperformed it, but had some availability issues and probably made like totally reasonable. Nurk provided $48 million worth of basketball. I'm willing to wager. But the perception here, like shared here on this podcast, was that Nurk's can get a little bump, get a little raise for his troubles, like $15-16 million a year. Part of me looks out at what happened with other centers on the market and say, you were maybe the best one out there, depending on what happens with Mitchell Robinson. But if it seems unlikely he's going to change teams, like maybe you were the best non-DeAndre Ayton center on the market. They're going to be the highest paid non-DeAndre Ayton center on the market. And that number is not $17 million. And so that's why Nurkic hasn't been signed as of almost 1 a.m. back in the league offices in New York City, at almost 10 o'clock out here in Portland on the first night of free agency. It was expected by me and I think some other reporters who cited unnamed sources. And I'm not citing unnamed sources. I am reading the tea leaves and just giving my best guess based on everything, the way the Blazers have done stuff and the way things went down, is that Nurk was just earmarked for a deal. But him not being here, this is like a no news is weird news, no news is bad news. I'm a natural pessimist. If you listen to the podcast, you already know. But like I'm having trouble reading why hasn't Nurk signed day one for a team that isn't going to be a cap space team, other than there's a larger trade in the works or there's just an impasse with the contract because the market has dictated that Nurk's just not worth what seemed to be sort of the prevailing logic a little bit ago. There's some forces working in both directions here though. Mo Bamba off the board for the mid-level exception. Isaiah Hartenstein off the board for the mid-level exception. Bamba stays in Orlando. Hartenstein goes to the New York Knicks. Andre Drummond off the board for a portion of the mid-level exception. $6 million goes to the Bulls. Damian Jones, one of your boy's favorite minimum targets, heads to the Lakers. DeAndre Jordan hilariously signs with the Denver Nuggets in the opening moments of free agency. One of the probably the funniest deal of day one is that the Nuggets had already been in contact with DeAndre Jordan's people to add him to the team. Cool. Good for them. I'm happy for them. But the rest of the market for the Blazers for what they have to spend is just it's weak, relatively weak. Like I mentioned, Mitchell Robinson of the Knicks. The Blazers could offer him mid-level money, but I think the Knicks would probably offer him more than that, and can legally offer him more than that to come back. So he's probably not in their range. And then after you get behind after Nurk, and I think this is what's working in Nurk's favor. And if you can't get Mitch Rob with the mid-level money, or you want to spend that mid-level money not on a center and on other places, we'll talk about that in the third segment. The centers available for the Blazers gets thin quick. It's retreads, Robin Lopez and Hassan Whiteside. Bring them back. Neither of them are starting level players. You cannot start either of those dudes. Gorgie Jang, who's borderline backup center, had some real promise a couple years ago. Really hasn't put it together since leaving Minnesota when he was briefly leading the NBA in 3-point shooting for the T-Wolves. He hasn't been that dude since he's bounced around to San Antonio and Atlanta. He just hasn't That's not who he is. He's a borderline backup center. Dwight Howard, who's a good backup center, but for how long? And does he again, it's these are backups. These are bench centers. Nurk and DeAndre Ayton and Mitch Rob are the best centers out there for sure. They straight up can't afford Ayton. I don't think they can afford Mitchell Robinson. So the person they can afford is Jusuf Nurkic, and I think that's the tricky part. The other thing working in the opposite direction, in the Blazers' favor, is that the teams that have cap space and could sign Nurk into cap space could give him more than the mid-level exception, like the tool the Blazers have to lure other free agents. Detroit, they don't need a big man. Orlando, Lord knows they don't need another center. And Indiana, who has, Miles Turner and a plethora of other fun power forward types that fill in that spot. And Goga Bitadze at backup center. They don't need a big. They just don't need a big. So the teams that with big old cap space to use, OKC's that's not what they're doing. And that's not in the market for veterans in that manner, unless you attach a future first round pick to them. But that's not how free agency works. So There isn't a market for Nurk. That helps and works in the Blazers' favor, but there isn't a really good crop of centers behind Nurk, and that's working in his favor. And so I think this gets done. That's why the read that maybe Portland is being patient to see kind of how other big seismic moves pay out is probably closest to the right explanation. But it is surprising. Like my take with Ant is like wait and see. My take with Nurk is like, yeah, this is weird. I thought this was going to be a done deal. I thought today's show was going to be about Nurk and Ant and back in the boat and here we go and blah, blah, blah. Here's what the Blazers can do. And now it's like, okay, Ant's here. He got a little more money than we thought he would. Nurk is chilling, like he's in town. He's been at the PF. Like, we'll see. I think it's odd, but I think like the lack of centers behind Nurk point to him probably coming back unless the Blazers are swinging a part of a larger trade that would net them a starting center because they absolutely still need that. But it's maybe not what they're targeting. And I think that's interesting. I think from the reporting, sounds like the person who plays backup center is going to be on a minimum deal, certainly not part of the mid-level exception. This Portland has a plan or a type coming together. Let's talk about the type of player the Blazers are reportedly interested in the third segment to close out the show. Before we do that, let me tell you about Bet Online, the fastest and easiest place to bet on all of your sports action, all of it. Bet on Kevin Durant's next team he plays for. Bet on Kyrie Irving's next team. Bet on DeAndre Ayton's next team. If you don't want to bet on NBA offseason futures, all your in-season sports are there for you. Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, the National Women's Soccer League, tennis, golf, all your combat sports, whatever it is, you're going to find it. So head on over to Bet Online. It's Bet Online where the game starts. Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. You are still listening to Locked On Blazers. According to Jake Fisher, Bleacher Report, Portland's got their eyes on two dudes who absolutely do not have positions. Gary Payton II, that's the mitten, son of former Oregon State Beaver great and Oakland's finest, Gary Payton. Pride of the Pacific Northwest, Gary Payton. And Bruce Brown of the Brooklyn Nets. So Gary Payton II and Bruce Brown. You might say, the Blazers don't need more guards, Mike. They don't need more guards. Neither of these dudes are guards. They're 6'4" weirdos. Neither of them has a position. They are basketball players. Bruce Brown's best position is screener on offense. He sets screens, he rolls to the rim. That's what he's best at on offense. That's like what centers do. Gary Payton is a great screener, screen for Steph Curry a whole bunch. Like that's how they incorporated him into the offense. And then he's like a slasher. They're both role men as their best skill on the offensive end, and on defense they can guard a lot of different spots. They're basketball players way more than they're guards. And to me, this says more about the type of basketball the Blazers see themselves playing than anything else. According to Jake Fisher, Bleacher Report. Wonderful reporter, Jake Fisher. The Blazers have offered Gary Payton the bulk of their mid-level exception, a contract starting at $8 million a year, and that they're in on Bruce Brown should the Nets have it blow up and Bruce Brown is out of there. I'm sure that all the other dominoes are going to fall in Brooklyn before that happens. Patty Mills has reportedly gone back to Brooklyn, and they also traded for Taurean Prince, but Brown is out there and kind of in limbo, right? Like in between heading back to Brooklyn and peacing out, maybe following Kyrie and Kevin Durant, or maybe finding another like good team to be a part of, if not soaking up some leftover money, depending on what the heck happens with the Nets. Like, I think there's just like, for a guy like Brown, it's like he's got to kind of figure out his situation and go make the best of what it can be, because he's a role player type. Gary Payton is a great role player type, great role player, wonderful defender, a great role player on a really good basketball team. And it finally clicked for him. And I'm really happy that a guy like Gary Payton, who was floating around the G League as like the best defensive player in the G League, finally got a chance to be a really good NBA player and is now going to potentially make, $8 million annually from the Portland Trail Blazers. But what does this say about Portland? Because I think it's important to note, and that's why I led with it. These guys aren't really guards. They're switchy, versatile defenders that play much bigger than they are, right? They can guard up in a couple sizes. They are screeners, not on-ball creators on offense. They're less shooters and more facilitators out of short roll type of stuff. They're center types. Like Bruce Brown, his best offensive position is legitimately center, like small ball five, smallest ball five. And GP's not that far away from that. Gary Payton II is not that far away from that. So what this says to me is about the style of basketball the Blazers want to play. In a perfect world with Dame and Ants on the court, you need versatile defenders to help them out. You need length. Like they need Nurk back just for the size. But outside of that, the ability to play super small or just super switchy rather, not super small, but super switchy with guys like Nasir Little and Jeremy Grant and Gary Payton and potentially also Bruce Brown depending on the price. Like conceivably, the Blazers could get both. They could spend, a portion of the biannual exception on Brown, depending on what his market is, right? So conceivably, they could get both. But it's switchy, versatile defenders who muck up the game and play small. The Blazers watched the playoffs and they said wings and versatile defensive players are the most valuable assets in the league, and we are going to target that, a certain type, this sort of positionless, amorphous athlete who can help, but is not not a guy who needs shots on offense, not a guy who commands a lot on offense, but brings it on defense and offers like weirdness, a funky weirdness that lets you play a little bit different on the offensive end while offering some versatility on the defensive end. This is a type, and the ability to play small and play funky and switch and do the things that Chauncey Billups' scheme in theory wants to do, which is like play really aggressive defense and show and trap and recover, or sometimes don't show a little bit softer and then sprint back and get to your man and stay in front, or just straight switch like we saw late in the season. A lot less blitzing and trapping from Chauncey Billups' defenses and more just kind of like switching 1 through 4 and showing high to the ball with the center when they had a traditional center in there, and then recovering, or when they played a little smaller, switch 1 through 5. This is a switch 1 through 5 type moves in a league that's heading in that direction defensively. Gary Payton II and Bruce Brown offer you that versatility. I think that the fact that those are reportedly the Blazers' targets give you a sense of the type of basketball they want to play, which might also be why they don't want to give Yusuf Nurkic the money he thought he was going to get. If they want to play less with a traditional center and more small ball 5 stuff, Jeremy Grant has played a little small ball 5. Like they could go super wacky small with Grant and Nas and Gary Payton and Justice Winslow. Like they could go wacky small but big, and that's the real advantage. Like you don't give up a lot of strength, and you still are pretty long, but you're switchy and good on defense. Like that's a type. That's a type. Justice Winslow kind of fits that mold. In theory, Nasir Little could eventually fit that mold. I think Grant's ability to guard 3s and 4s and maybe play a little bit of small ball 5, like he fits that mold as well. This is where they want to be. You are seeing it at least come together. I think they add Nurk back, but between him not getting a contract and reportedly who else they're interested in, I think you get a sense of Portland's overall feeling about the center position. It doesn't mean that Nurk won't be back. It doesn't mean that Nurk's not going to get a long-term contract. But I think we're seeing a little bit behind the curtain. I think we are paying a little bit of attention to the man behind the curtain. If you get that reference, you really are of a certain age. But if we're getting a peek back there to see kind of what they want to do. Will it come together, or will Gary Payton just go back to the Warriors and go compete for a title? Will Bruce Brown end up heading to a team that's closer to contention than Portland? We'll see. But if that's the type of player Portland covets, and trading for Josh Hart and Justice Winslow is like, oh yeah, like a versatile defender who can play across multiple positions, like you are getting a sense of the type of roster that Joe Cronin would like to build and that Chauncey Billups would like to play with. A lot of stuff is going to happen between now and the next time we talk, which quite frankly brings me a little bit of anxiety, because it would be better timing if all of the sort of news could be followed by a podcast the very next day. But this is Friday's show. This is the first show of July. Welcome, we made it. I will be back on July 4th. I'm going to have a show. It'll just be in your feeds on July 4th. I'm going to record it Sunday evening. So there's going to be a bunch of stuff that happens. Kevin Durant might get traded, might not get traded. We'll follow what happens with Nurk. We'll follow what happens across the league. When the dust settles a little bit later next week, when the signings become official, we'll take a look at all of the sort of free agent stuff. Blazers play a summer league game next Thursday and then again on next Saturday. So the offseason is in full swing, and you know where to enjoy it. And that's Locked On Blazers 5 days a week, wherever you get a podcast, and also on YouTube. Tell your friends about the show and make it your first listen every single day. Come back next week. We're doing more of it. I appreciate you listening, and I will talk to you soon.